This video works across the research landscape. We start with the split between basic and applied research, move through the domains of clinical research and the phases a clinical trial passes through on its way to market, and close with the case of the first malaria vaccine. Global health research brings together scholars and practitioners from many different disciplines to tackle big challenges. So the methods of these disciplines are the methods of global health research. We can organize that landscape as a taxonomy, and over the next few minutes, we'll work through it piece by piece. Here's the taxonomy. Don't worry if this diagram looks overwhelming. At first, we'll work through it piece by piece. Here's the roadmap. Research is divided into two main categories, basic and applied, which you can see on the left side of the diagram. Within applied research, we have clinical research, including clinical trials, translational research, and implementation and policy research. Overlapping with applied research is monitoring and evaluation, which sometimes, but not always, qualifies as research. We'll start on the left with basic research and work our way across. Basic research, also known as pure or blue skies research, is the pursuit of fundamental knowledge of phenomena. For example, scientists conduct laboratory experiments to understand the parasitic life cycle and how parasites interact with humans at different stages. Another example is the scientific investigation of the properties of cancer cells to better understand how they grow and spread. The information generated by basic science becomes the basis for applied science. Harvard neurobiologist Dr. Rachel Wilson explains this beautifully. The new therapies of today, she says, were the prototypes of yesterday, and the prototypes of yesterday were previously just findings in laboratories, and before that they were just an idea. Unless we have new ideas, we're not going to have useful therapies. Great new therapies don't just fall like apples from a tree. While basic research expands our understanding, applied research focuses on specific problems or real-world applications. Much of global health research falls into the applied domain because our mission is to improve health and achieve equity in health for all people worldwide. That's this block on the diagram and everything nested inside it. Applied science takes many different forms. One of those forms is clinical research. Clinical research is a broad field that aims to understand human disease, develop better ways to detect, diagnose, prevent, and treat disease, and to promote health. That definition covers a lot of ground, so it helps to see the domains it spans. There are at least 6 I can think of. Treatment and prevention research tests new approaches for preventing or treating illness, and that includes clinical trials of drugs, biologics, devices, instruments, and behavioral interventions. Screening research develops and evaluates methods for detecting illness risk factors, or markers. Diagnostic research develops and evaluates methods for identifying health conditions or illness. Genetic studies examine links between genes and disorders. Epidemiological studies study the patterns, causes, prevalence, and incidence of disease in a population. And health services research studies how people access healthcare services, healthcare costs, and outcomes. One type of clinical research is a clinical trial. If you've ever wondered why it takes so long for a promising treatment to reach patients, the phases of a trial help explain why. Here's that part of the taxonomy up close. Preclinical work, then the numbered phases, then market. In the United States, drugs, biologics, devices, and instruments complete these phases prior to going to market. In the early phases of drug trials, the objective is to understand how the compound affects the body. What is a safe dose that could be effective? Preclinical research asks, are there signs that the drug candidate will have an effect in the lab? Phase 0 is an optional phase, enrolling fewer than 10 human subjects. What happens in the body, the pharmacokinetics, when a very low dose is administered to human subjects? Phase 1 enrolls tens of people. Is the drug safe? What is the best dose that balances possible effects with toxicity? Phase 2 enrolls hundreds and asks, when using this optimal dose, is there any effect of the drug on clinical markers or health outcomes? Phase 3 enrolls thousands. What is the effect of the drug on clinical markers or health outcomes when compared to an existing treatment or placebo in a randomized evaluation? Phase 3 trials put the optimal dose to the test, seeking to determine if the drug works and to quantify the size of the effect. Success at this stage is required for regulatory approval in some countries, and drugs that pass are typically approved for use by the governing regulatory body. Once a drug reaches market, Phase 4 asks a different question. Are there long-term adverse effects of the drug once it is available on the market? In the United States, the FDA requires that most interventional studies of any regulated products with research sites in the US be registered in the clinicaltrials.gov trial registry. Many countries have their own registries, and the World Health Organization maintains a web portal that searches across registries. Trial registries are useful for researchers and patients alike. When my wife's Aunt Debbie learned she had an aggressive brain tumor, we searched clinicaltrials.gov and identified several trials recruiting patients for experimental glioblastoma treatments. Debbie decided to take part in a phase 1 trial that injected modified poliovirus into her tumor. She lived for another 5 years and helped to advance the science of glioblastoma treatment. Healthy volunteers and patients like Debbie are the backbone of clinical research. Their sacrifices, combined with the ingenuity of scientists and research teams, have created thousands of medical breakthroughs. But for every new drug approved, there is a trail of failure. This figure traces the pipeline from basic research to FDA approval. And recent studies estimate that fewer than 15% of candidates entering phase 1 trials are ultimately approved by the FDA. The pipeline covers what the FDA regulates: drugs, biologics, devices, and instruments. Studies of behavioral interventions, social programs, and policies fall outside it. Nevertheless, we still design studies to estimate the efficacy of interventions, programs, and policies, and many of these tests meet the World Health Organization's definition of a clinical trial. Any research study that prospectively assigns human participants or groups of humans to one or more health-related interventions to evaluate the effects on health outcomes. To see the whole pipeline in a single case, take the first malaria vaccine. In 2021, after more than 35 years of research, the World Health Organization recommended widespread use of a vaccine candidate called RTSS to prevent malaria in children. Development began in 1984, and soon after, a promising vaccine candidate entered preclinical research. Researchers performed tests on non-human subjects to collect data on how well the vaccine worked, how much damage it could do to an organism, and how the body affected the vaccine. Clinical research on humans began in 1992. Researchers conducted a phase 1 safety and immunogenicity trial with 20 adults in the Gambia in 1997. The results suggested that the vaccine did not have any significant toxicity, but did produce the expected antibodies. That is the phase 1 question from the table, asked of a real candidate: tens of participants and safety before effect. Several phase 2 studies conducted over the next decade demonstrated the efficacy of the vaccine against several endpoints. A phase 2b trial began in Mozambique in 2003 with more than 2,000 children. Each child was randomly assigned to receive 3 doses of RTSS, or a control vaccine. After 6 months, the prevalence of malaria was 37% lower in the treatment group than in the control group. This phase 2 trial was an important proof of concept study. The results of a large phase 3 trial with more than 15,000 infants and young children in 7 African countries were published in 2015. Children who participated were randomly assigned to one of 3 arms: 3 doses of RTS, as in a booster dose, at month 20th, 3 doses of RTS, as in a booster dose of a comparator vaccine, at month 20th, or 4 doses of a comparator vaccine. The vaccine reduced clinical malaria cases by 28% among young children and 18% among infants over a 3 to 4 year period. This phase 3 trial demonstrated that the treatment was efficacious. On the basis of these results, the European Medicines Agency issued a favorable European scientific opinion. That led the health ministries in Ghana, Kenya, and Malawi to authorize a pilot study in 2019 to assess the feasibility of administering the required 4 doses of the vaccine as part of routine childhood immunization programs. After more than 800,000 children were immunized under this program, the WHO recommended that countries with moderate to high transmission adopt the vaccine.